The ultimate insider. So, what is exactly money? To better understand or appreciate the cryptocurrencies, it's important to get a good grasp of the nature of money. This is because cryptocurrencies are a form of money, and by understanding the nature of money, especially what important characteristic it should possess, you will be able to better appreciate and understand the nature of cryptocurrencies, and in turn, you will be able to better understand the principle of holding. Now, what is money? At its very core, money is something that is used to represent the value of other things. For example, you gave me a money in exchange of receiving a book, suppose, and that sum of money represents the value of the book. The money I received from you and others who have bought this book, I will use to purchase or acquire something of value from other vendors today or tomorrow. If you study history, you will be able to see that the values of things have been expressed in different forms and money. The primary way by which values have been expressed has come in different shapes and material. Case in point, things like gold, shells, wheat, and salt have been used in the past to represent value and as a medium of exchange. But for something to be able to continue representing value, the people who are using it must continue trusting that a medium of exchange is indeed valuable, and most importantly its value will persist for a long time so that they will be still able to benefit from it in the future. Now, how the people's trust in money has been evolved. Only until 1 or 2 centuries ago, societies had always placed their interest in something when it comes to the value or representation of money. But the way people trust in money has shifted from trusting something to trusting someone. What does I mean by this? In the past, people would use, as I mentioned earlier, stuff like gold, wheat, salt, and even seashells as a medium of exchange of money. But over time, people caught on to the fact that using such things as a measure of value and medium of exchange can be quite bothersome. But can you imagine buying your groceries with seashells or salt? What if inflation was very high the last several years and you want to buy a month of worth groceries? Can you imagine bringing that much of salt to the supermarket? And if you are the grocery owner, can you imagine having to wait the salt being paid to you by your customers and needing a very large space and vehicle to store and transport all that salt? And what if it rains? Do you get the picture? Because of such inconvenience, people were forced to improvise and come up with a more practical value storage and payment solution, that was paper money. So this was how it worked in the beginning. When you take up a bank or the government's officer to take physical possession of your gold bars for storage, they would issue you certificate or bills for the amount or value of the gold you deposited with them. Say your gold bars were worth around $500. The bank or the government taking possession of your gold bars would issue you a paper certificate or bills worth $500. Now think about this. Which is easier to carry around, paper bills worth $500 or the gold worth $500? Another thing to think about this. Which is easier to cut in smaller pieces or value, paper bills or a gold bar? If you want to buy a bag of chips of about $5, you would only have to give the cashier $5 bill. But if you are carrying around 500 worth gold, you would have to cut it proportionately to an amount that closely or exactly represents $5. Another thing worth thinking about back in the day is this: if you wanted your gold bars back, all you would need to do is give $500 worth bills of certificate back to the government, or to redeem your gold bars. It's that simple. Because of the convenience and practicality it brings, paper money has grown so much in popularity and has become the primary means by which goods and services are bought and sold all over the world today. Back in the days, the value of the United States dollar was linked or based on gold. The money of the United States of America was based on its gold holdings. This was referred to as the gold standard. But over time, the macroeconomy has changed, and as a result, the link connecting the value of United States dollar to the value of gold was cut. As a result, Americans and the rest of the world, considering the US dollar has become the world's primary currency, had been conditioned to shift their trust from gold to the federal government. In other words, people have been conditioned to shift their trust when it comes to monetary value from something gold to someone who assumed responsibility for the value of the dollar, which is the federal government. And the only reason this system continues to work is trust. Because let's face it, there is no real underlying asset of worth behind the value of the dollar or other currencies. This was how the fiat or the paper money was born. Now about the fiat money. The word fiat is a Latin word that's best interpreted as a decree. This means that any fiat currency, that is paper money, only has value because their respective governments say so. As a result of such legal decrees of value, paper or fiat currencies are also called as legal tenders, which means they have to be accepted for payments of goods and services in their respective country. That being said, you can now see that money as we know it today has value only because its legal status, which is declared by governments. As I mentioned earlier, the trust in the value of money has shifted from something gold to someone the government. Now the fiat money as we know it now has become some pretty serious issues. These are being centralized and are practically unlimited in quantity. Being centralized means that there is a central or lone authority that has the power to issue and control its supply, which is in the case of United States dollar is the Federal Reserve. It's also practically unlimited in quantity because the Federal Reserve has the power and capability to print or mint more units of the US dollar if it chooses to do so. Now, why is this serious concern? The reason is one of the most basic principles of economics, supply and demand. To be more specific, this means that when the supply of an object is increased, the value of that object will tend to decrease, assuming demand for that thing remain constant. Conversely, when the supply of an item is decreased, assuming constant demand, the value will increase. So if the Federal Reserve or any monetary authority prints more money, it will flood the market and with more of that currency, which can make it worth less, that is, buy less of goods and service. So when you see the price of goods and service rising substantially over the long term, it's not necessarily because they become more expensive, but because the value of the currency, example the United States dollar, has dropped due to the increasing supply. Let's say about the digitizing money now. The establishment of the fiat money has made it easy, even mandatory, to create digital ones. The advent of the internet and establishment of the monetary authority that control and issue money have made the idea of digitizing money, that is making most of the digital or online currencies and letting such authorities keep tabs on who owns how much, a feasible and even necessary one. Proof of this is the evolution of alternative modes of payment to the point that they have become the main method for transacting today. For example, credit cards, fund transfers, and PayPal have become standard forms of payment these days, and in the United States, in particular, paying in cash is looked upon as unconventional or even suspicious in some cases. The ramifications of this evolution are huge. One of them is the ever-shrinking amount of physical money circulating in many of the world's biggest economies and financial systems. As I mentioned earlier, it's highly unusual now to pay for stuff in cash in the United States unless you're talking about mom and pop stores and other very small businesses. Becoming exceedingly digitized, how does money is in this digital form work? And a more specific concern with the digitalization of money is this: what systems are in place to prevent double spending of money? That is, what's to stop me from digitally reproducing my money so that I would have so much more than what I actually have. Like creating duplicate copies of my favorite songs for listening or my different devices. Most financial institutions today address this issue with centralization. What this means is there's only one party responsible for keeping records of financial transactions under a particular system, that is, keeping track of who owns what and how much. Everyone who transacts under such system has an account which has a specific ledger under which all transactions and balances are recorded and maintained. Everyone, including you and me, trusts the system of financial institution to keep accurate records of our balance, and these institutions in turn trust their computer system. In short, the solution of centralization of records is based on a ledger that's stored in one big ass computer system or network. Prior to the creation of the blockchain, there have been many attempts to create alternative digital forms of payments that have failed because of one very important issue: preventing double spending sans a central authority. That's why the centralized records keeping solution has persisted until this day. It generally works. Now, how the challenges are posed by the centralized monetary system. Whenever we give someone or a group of people total authority over something, there will be serious challenges that will need to be addressed. When it comes to doing so over the monetary system, there are three specific challenges that need to be addressed, and these are corruption, mismanagement, and control. There is saying that absolute power corrupts absolutely. Central banks or monetary authorities such as the Federal Reserve, who have the legal mandates to print money and create value in the process, practically have the ability to control how value is created and destroyed in their respective countries and in case of the Federal Reserve in the whole world. And such legal mandates are akin to unlimited or absolute financial power. A very good example of this is the fiasco at Wells Fargo, where its employees were ordered to open fictitious bank and credit card accounts in an attempt to puff up the company's revenue and consequently its net profit for several years. And compared to monetary authorities, Wells Fargo isn't even an authority. Mismanagement is simply when a manager or a steward acts in a way that it's not consistent with how his or her job the owner wants him or her to act. Mismanagement is in the case of monetary authorities can happen when the government acts against the interest of the people they govern. A very good example of this is the way the United States monetary authorities allowed major financial institutions to issue credit-linked notes or financial derivatives with the mortgage that have very high default risk, which corrupt credit rating agencies have rated as investment grade. This has resulted in the near collapse of the United States financial system, which is the Federal Reserve rescued by acting against the interest of the public by using public money, which the public has objected to save the biggest financial institution from collapsing in 2008. Another issue of mismanagement is printing of new money without proper consideration of the deflationary effect of such an action. As mentioned earlier, printing your money floods the financial system with too much money, which in turn can cause a specific currency's value to plunge or drop. Law of supply and demand. Remember, a very good case of this is the Venezuelan government, who mismanaged the country's financial system and official currency by printing too much money. The Venezuelan currency has become practically worthless to the point that people started to measure its value by weight instead of amount. Lastly, a central monetary authority means surrendering all control over the people's money to the government. Because government have the legal mandate to control the money supply, they also have the authority to control your money in ways that can prove to be very unfavorable or unjust to you. For example, freezing your bank accounts and keeping you from accessing your money. Keeping physical cash on hand doesn't mean the government cannot keep you from beneficially using your money. Governments can still keep you from using your money for your benefit simply by revoking its legal tender status, so you won't be able to use it for transactions such as what India did in the past. Let's talk about gold and silver. Why? Because of its connection to money. To be more specific, gold and silver are not just investments, they are money. You might say no, money is the US dollar or the British pound. Sorry to burst your bubble, but those are merely currencies, as in the case with all the fiat currencies in the world. But currency is different from money. First, currency is just a legal tender status, the value of which isn't determined by people but by government. Second, legit money has important characteristics that make it so, and the United States dollar doesn't have all of them, and as such, money is much more than just a medium of exchanging goods and service. Upon close evaluation, you will find that only gold and silver actually meet these characteristics. If you look at financial assets like stocks, bonds, or even real estates, they don't pass the consistency test there because their price tend to fluctuate. For other like the stocks, chances are that stock of companies from over 100 years ago, save for a few big strong ones, have either deteriorated in value or are no longer worth anything because the companies whose ownership such stocks represent no longer exist. The only item whose purchasing powers have not only been maintained but have also increased over the long term are the gold and silver. If only for this characteristic alone, gold and silver have kicked the butt of many currencies that have failed over the last 5,000 years. And if you factor in the fact that the gold and silver are the only items that continue to have high value since the early days of all the civilization on earth, you will see why fiat currency are not really money. Now the question is, can the value of gold and silver be manipulated? The answer to this question, I'll focus the discussion more on gold. Gold price manipulation is defined as any intentional effort to control the price of its most precious metal. This supposedly happens in major financial markets when gold trades intentionally attempt to influence gold prices via certain financial instruments, particularly derivatives. These trades may have been able to successfully cause short term deviation from the real value of gold, but over the long term, it does not appear to be so. The United States Security and Exchange Commission defines manipulation in greater details as any intentional act whose purpose is to trick investors by artificially affecting or controlling the market for a specific asset and include activities like code tricking and voluminous trades or transactions that are meant to paint a deceptive impression of demand for a particular asset and sway market price in their trade's favor. And when speaking of gold price manipulation, there's one particular type of manipulation that is believed to be prevalent, and that is price suppression, that is manipulating gold price downwards. A really good question to ask then is this: are the prices of gold and consequently silver manipulated? If you ask enough number of gold traders or investors, they will tell you that it can be. Even more, if they will be probably tell you that they are being systematically manipulated right this very moment. Are they right? There are several iterations of this beliefs. One of them is that the central bankers control the prices of precious metals. Another iteration of this belief is that greedy private commercial bankers are the ones manipulating gold prices downwards through the derivative instruments, short selling and future contracts, and high volume trades meant to paint a scenario of low and decreasing demand for gold and silver. When you look at theories like this, they seem plausibly at first glance because of instances where gold prices were controlled in the past, such as when certain government fixed the price of gold for decades or when the London gold suppressed its price, and to the fact that very rarely do financial institutions get penalized for gold price manipulation, and you have a very prevalent belief that indeed gold and silver price can be manipulated. But if you look at the long-term price histories of gold and silver, it becomes exceedingly clear that the answer to our question is no. Price of these precious metals cannot be manipulated. Check out the academic paper on the subject and you will find that no compelling evidence for the case of price suppression or manipulation exists. In fact, you will find a very clear cyclic pattern if you check out the long-term price charts of these two precious metals. For a long-term view, particularly after 2000, you will probably start to wonder how the heck people believed that price suppression for these two precious metals existed. And when you think about crying wolf, you may start to wonder why manipulation is selective. That is why manipulation is responsible when prices go down and when prices are going up. It's the market that's pushing it up. And while we cannot disprove the belief that the world's biggest player attempt to manipulate prices, their effect, if any, are very short-lived because it's practically impossible to suppress the true market price of gold in the market. Those who want to suppress the price of gold and silver over the long haul simply do not have enough financial resources to do so. And any attempt to do so will only backfire soon because any significant drop in the price of gold and silver will only increase the demand for it and consequently lead to an increase in their prices. Now let's see about naked short selling. Many investors and traders of these two precious metals tend to certain financial institutions, particularly bullion banks, of naked short selling in order to put downward pressure on prices. But does naked short selling mean? Short selling means selling something you don't have. So if you talk about short selling gold bullion, it means you are selling gold bullion you don't have yet. Now, why would you sell something you don't have yet and get into a whole lot of trouble for it? After all, isn't selling something you don't have considered fraud? Well, not really. You may not have the gold bullion yet, but you can borrow other people's gold bullion to sell them. And when the price of gold bullion drops, you can buy the same amount of gold bullion you borrowed for short selling and in the process make money. This type of short selling is called covered short selling because you cover yourself by first borrowing enough gold bullion to sell. Naked short selling is uncovered short selling, that is, you sell the bullion you don't have even when you haven't borrowed any to sell yet. Naked short selling also happens when you short sell gold bullion without any guarantee from other people that you can borrow enough bullion for short selling from them. Naked short selling can put you or any trader who does it at high risk of not being able to deliver the gold bullion sold to the buyer. Thus, the potential impact of naked shorts can be very serious. There are rumors or urban legends that accuses the federal government of using bullion banks to execute tons of naked gold short sales on the commodities exchange on its behalf to suppress the price of gold, maintain the US dollar value, and give this bullion bank the opportunity to make huge money by repurchasing the bullion at lower prices. Sounds so evil and believable, right? But think about this. If the number of naked short sellers and their naked short positions were that significant, the drop in price of gold would be so huge that it would generate a reciprocal spike in demand for it. And the huge spike in demand would just wipe out the price drop because of the law of supply and demand. Another thing to consider is the practically executing huge amount of naked short sells just to suppress or manipulate the price of gold or silver. To execute this strategy effectively to drop the price of these two precious metals, naked short selling institution would have to purchase some huge number of futures contracts just to cover their naked short position. And as the future contracts mature, they would either have to buy the actual amount of huge metal per future contracts bought or roll over their position by contracts that will be expiring and flip the next ones out. In either case, the institution involved in naked short selling for price suppression will need to eventually unwind their position, which will ultimately resolve or neutralize any price suppression effects of their attempt naked short sales. And this explains why short selling for price suppression isn't realistic, and why you'll see that based on long-term price chart for both gold and silver, their value follow the cycle or patterns. The main point of it all is that despite many conspiracy theories of price manipulation for gold and silver, proof of such is lacking. As for all the financial assets whose value are market driven, there are bull or bearish markets over the long term. Bear markets, or when prices are falling, don't equate to price manipulation anymore. Then bull markets. Bull markets are when the price are going up too. It's all about market demand cycles and ability to time